Yeah, we got about 3 members attending.
Well, I don't want to get into that later on, but concern I have. Anyway, here we go. Hold on. Everybody
There
settle
I
down,
am.
stop your talking, take your seats. You can talk at the break.
Virtual cookies.
The virtual cookies, unfortunately, yes. But everybody, welcome to the November SAC Zoom meeting. I'm Tom Curry, the president of the SAC. Since we don't have that many SAC members on board, according to Paul, who's looked at the roster of attendees so far. But we're going to have, I don't want to say a short meeting tonight. It'll be a somewhat awkward meeting if we only have a few SAC members, because we want to elect some people to positions, actually just one position, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But we have just a reminder to use your question and answer tab at the bottom of your computers, if you know where that's at, or your Zoom toolbar, and the chat tab to chat amongst yourselves out there. You might find out who's there, who's not there. And the only people visible on the screen are going to be the presenters. And then when our main keynote presenter tonight talks, we'll try to remember to all turn off our video so he has the screen. So next year, 2021, hope it goes better. I hope we eventually get back to in-person meetings, but that probably will not happen for the first half of the year. So we will be left with Zoom meetings. Normally, SAC does not have a December meeting, but we could, I presume. Enough members wanted to have that. So let us know if you're really interested in, instead of a party, having another meeting with another guest speaker. But we're always open to emails. We're always open to other members of SAC wanting to present something of what they've been up to during the COVID holiday for so many people. Many of us are retired, so we don't see much difference. Except we can't go out to eat as often. Let's see, the next thing up is most of us in the board have agreed to stay on board to see it through. There's not much going on, so there's not much to see through. So the only thing we need to try to find a candidate for is the treasurer. Paul Dixon, I want to thank him for the good job he's done. I have in the agenda that he kept us afloat. He kept us from being, I guess, audited by anybody. And he's been to Mexico yet with our funds. I haven't seen the balance. Paul, what is our balance? Do you happen to know offhand?
It was $3,200. I just looked at it about 20 minutes ago. That's off the top of my head.
Okay, it probably hasn't changed much since then, since interest rates are pretty low on our savings. What have you gotten so far for re-enlistments? I mean, not re-enlistments. Members re-upping for next year. Have any idea?
Hang on a second. Yeah, it was with $3,179 is the balance currently in our checking account.
Okay.
And for our membership, we're at 40 members. But I've got 3 I haven't processed, but they're probably renewals for next year.
Okay, so those members who are out there, or any EVAC member who would like to join SAC, please consider it. Keep us afloat, although might not be a lot to need to keep afloat for this next year. May not be doing a lot. I'm not sure the Messier Marathon would be any more than an ad hoc, everybody meets up out there and brings your own toilet facility.
Yeah,
and we're
we
out
don't
there.
have many big expenditures.
Pardon me?
We don't have many big expenditures. No
Correct.
meeting room.
Yeah, our insurance would be about the only thing, I think. So have we gotten, I know I haven't seen Rick on board to see if he's gotten any emails from anybody wanting to volunteer to be the new treasurer. And if we have none, then Kevin and I will work the bank on behalf of the club. Again, that shouldn't be too big a deal right now. So I will be getting with both Paul and Kevin on that later on. So that pretty much, if anybody objects to those of us who are already on the board extending our tour of duty, go ahead and file your complaint, and we'll put you into the position that you want instead. An announcement: timeanddate.com has put out an interesting request that if anybody is interested in live streaming from their telescope video for the November 29th and 30th penumbral eclipse, feel free to contact them. They would probably like to have the cooperation and participation of as many people as can, just to get a wide variety of views. It's interesting, Ted, you might even comment on, you have a mobile observatory in Norway? That's kind of crazy. So if anybody's interested, please contact them. And being a short business meeting, I didn't present anything, and we had no members wanted to present anything. So we will jump to the guest presenter so he doesn't have to wallow through a bunch of SAC business right now. He's with the Fountain Hill Astronomy Club. I think, Ted, you started that, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, two people, we co-founded it.
And you are a NASA JPL solar system ambassador. Do they have like an embassy or someplace up there?
No, but we're the people that the aliens will contact when they ask somebody to take them to their leader. They find one of us, and then we take them to whoever we think our leader is. It could be you, Tom, for all I know.
Yeah,
So get
I don't
ready.
want to show my hand right now. You never know. It could be.
You bet.
So Ted, I will let you have the floor, and you can make your presentation. And I only have a question for you.
Sure.
Is there anything special happening tonight?
Yes. Well, let's see. What time is it? Well, about 15 minutes ago, actually, there was an occultation of a magnitude 10 star by the asteroid Uniki, and I had my telescope outside pointed at that star, and so after the meeting I'll go out there and see whether I was successful in recording this occultation. Let's see here, last week a bunch of us went out and recorded an occultation by the asteroid Bathilde, and I don't know if you can all see this, but this is the current skyplane plot of the asteroid. That all those lines represent individual recordings of the star being occulted by the asteroid. The more people that go out and do that, the more resolution we get on these skyplane cross sections of the asteroid's bodies. So it's a group called IOTA that I work with, and I think I've talked to SAC about participating in this in the past. But there's some active observers in the valley, and if you'd like to join us, just let me know.
Okie doke. Well, I'll let you assume the screen if you want to take over. Let me see if I...
Okay. I guess, yeah, once you have released it, I will try to share the screen here.
Okay. Oh. Okay. Okay, Tom Mosden, I think unless...
Tom, you just have to stop sharing.
Oh, okay. Ah, there we go. And Ted, you can...
I'll give that a try now. Oh, wait a minute. It says host has disabled participant screen sharing. So.
Okay. So Tom, you should see a down arrow.
Yeah.
Right next to. Let's see. Where is it? Is it security?
Yeah, right next to share screen.
Or
There we go. All panelists.
Ah, there we go.
Here we go. That should do it.
Okay.
Try that and see if you can take over.
All right.
Go.
I am. It says I'm screen sharing. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Got it.
Looks great.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for the invitation, everybody. I will start by letting you know that I am no expert at astrophotography, whether with or without a telescope, but it is significantly easier to take some astrophotographs that you will enjoy without a telescope. And so I thought I'd start here by talking about a way to get into taking some nice pictures of the sky that will satisfy you without having to concern yourself with all the actually the second hobby of astronomy, astrophotography. As most of you know who've tried it, it's quite a difficult task to get all the equipment working successfully together, but it's very rewarding if you can be one of those top folks. But it's really an incredible amount of effort. So I'll do my best to try to give you some introduction on techniques and tips for taking some pictures of the sky that you'll enjoy. I will let's see here, make sure this works. There we go. I will highly recommend that you obtain one or the other of these books. I think Beth Ruggiero York's book, Fun in the Dark, is a really wonderful book. She's local in the valley here, and it's got lots of wonderful tips, and a lot of this presentation is based upon the chapter headings in her book. She has spoken to the Fountain Hills Photography Club's wonderful work. So her book is really quite good. I would recommend it to anyone. If you point your telescope, point your camera at the northern sky and leave the shutter open for a while, you'll very likely end up with something that looks like this. This was taken by my friend Scott Adams in McDowell Mountain Park. He uses a Nikon D750 and an 18 millimeter lens. He exposed this for 8 minutes and stacked 8 frames. And I'll talk about stacking and things like that later on. The aperture f4 and a low ISO of just 100, and was able to capture both a nice image of the foreground as well as the picture of the stars circling Polaris and the North Celestial Pole. He also took this photograph from Lost Dutchman State Park of the Milky Way, almost vertical. In this case, there was no stacking at all. This is a 15-second exposure, giving good exposure to the foreground as well as the sky itself. Again, raising the ISO a little bit to 3200 to get a little more light, to a little more signal to the chip in a short 15-second exposure. And we'll talk about why keeping your exposure short is important later on as well. Scott also took this from Wupatki National Monument. I was up there with him about 2 months ago. There's a really nice dark place in the monument. It's the Doney Picnic Area. It's about 7 miles in to the northern entrance to Wupatki National Monument, and it is just over the border to the Bortle 1 skies. It's about 45 minutes north of Flagstaff on, I think it's 89 that goes north. And we've been up there several times, and it is really dark and not that far from town. There's a nice parking area where you can set up all your scopes to really enjoy this. So this is a stack of 4 frames, each of 4 minutes exposure, using a star tracker, which I'll talk about later on as well. So these are the topics we'll talk about tonight: the night sky and its motions, types of night photography, equipment, setting up your camera, some of the challenges of night photography, photographing stars as points as opposed to those nice star trails, and then things like ISO and exposure length. So the night sky and its motions. If you look east, you should see something a little bit like this as the night goes on. You'll see the stars rising in the east. There comes Orion, you can see clearing the horizon. And this is because the Earth is turning, of course, and the eastern horizon is going down, so it looks like the stars are rising. If you look west, it's the opposite, right? The western horizon is rising, stars appear to be setting, and there goes Saturn, there goes the moon, and so on. But if you look north, you see this other mysterious situation. There's one star in the middle that doesn't move at all. That's Polaris. And that's because if you consider Earth to be a big grapefruit, and you take a big knitting needle and poke it through the grapefruit and spin it, that's what we do every day. But the knitting needle continues to point to this point in the sky that we call the North Celestial Pole, which is very closely marked in the northern hemisphere by the star Polaris. And that's how you get those nice star trail photos, by pointing your camera north. So here we are. This is the direction of spin. We spin counterclockwise, looking down from the top. And as I mentioned, the North Pole, South Pole axis points to that star Polaris in the northern sky. Oop, wrong direction. Now, we don't see the same stars, of course, every month of the year. And the reason for this is something that, well, you know, when I started out in this hobby in the year 2000, I had no idea that the stars were different over the course of the year. It's something you realize as you understand some of the motions that go on. So here's what's going on. Earth in summer, we're on in this picture, we're on what I would call the near side of the sun. And as a result, at night, we see all the constellations on this imaginary celestial sphere that are on the near side facing us here on the screen, the ones with the letters mirror imaged, Hercules and Lyra and so on. But 6 months later, we've traveled halfway around the sun. We're on the back side of the sun in this little center picture here. And the direction of night is in the other direction. So in the winter, we see the constellations on the far side of this celestial sphere, like Orion, Lepus, and Gemini, and Taurus, the ones you'll start to see now if you look up at the sky at 9 or 10 o'clock. And of course, if you get up early in the morning, you'll see the constellations as they will be in 3 or 4 months. So it's kind of a nice little time machine look ahead to see what's coming up. I've listed the 88 modern constellations on the right here. We can only see half of them, of course, from the northern hemisphere, so I'm only going to test you on the ones that we can see from the northern hemisphere at the end of this. So you'll have the rest of this talk to look that up on the internet and check that out. So this is what we mean when we say a constellation is located on the imaginary sphere. There's no particular distance involved, but if I say, oh, there's a new supernova visible in Lyra, that eliminates 87 out of 88 parts of the sky that you have to look in. So learning some of your constellations, you know, it will help you navigate the night sky, and it's just a convenient way to get started. That's how I tell a lot of young kids. Learn a few constellations and learn a few important stars in those constellations, and it will help you get started in the hobby. Okay, so let's move on to talk about the types of night photography. We've got a few of them listed here. And you know, as you go out at night and try some of these, similar to the answer to what kind of telescope should I buy, I tell people it depends on what kind of object you intend to fall in love with looking at. And since you don't know that up front, try them all, join the club, go out on some public events, look through other people's telescopes at lots of objects, and then figure out what really turns you on, and then we can help you better answer the question, what kind of telescope should I buy? So here's some different types of night photography that you might want to try. Landscapes with star trails, like one of the pictures we saw before. Landscapes with stars as points, where you'll have to take shorter exposures. Moonrise and moonset. Different lunar and astronomical events like eclipses and meteor showers. Painting with light is something that's fun to do in some of your pictures. And of course, traditional astrophotography, where you move up to having a more expensive mount and try to track the sky and take really, really long exposures of very, very faint objects, which we're not going to really get into. Here's another example, an example of one of those composed pictures with a beautiful foreground and the beautiful star trails circling Polaris. Another example of a night sky image with the stars as points. So here we've got a shorter exposure, but with enough ambient light that you can get that nice, beautiful snow-covered mountain, along with the reflection of the mountain and the stars in this beautiful lake. I don't know who took this picture, but it's a really pretty one. Here's a picture of moonrise, full moonrise over a town. And moonrise through, I guess, some serious smoke from lots of forest fires.
If you looked at the moon over the
Oh, so here's a little video about lunar eclipses. See if we can get that
if you
to
looked
play.
at the moon over the course of a few weeks, you'd probably notice that it looks slightly different every day. The change in its shadow is based on where the moon is in its orbit. Over the course of a few weeks, this cycle the phases of the moon that it looks slightly different every once a month.
Hang on a
At
minute
least
here.
twice a
I am playing it twice, so let me start this. Try to start this again for you. There we go.
If you looked at the moon over the course of a few weeks, you'd probably notice that it looks slightly different every day. The change in its shadow is based on where the moon is in its orbit. We call this cycle the phases of the moon, and it occurs roughly once a month. At least twice a year, however, something quite different happens. The moon passes through the shadow cast by the Earth, causing it to look extremely unusual for a short period of time. From the Earth, the moon will appear to darken and turn a deep red before eventually returning to normal. This is called a lunar eclipse. If we were to look at what happens from space during an eclipse, it would go something like this. First, the moon passes through what's called the penumbra, where the sun's light is only partially obscured. This results in only a slight darkening of the moon. As the moon continues along its path, however, it enters what's called the umbra, where all direct light from the sun is blocked. But if the sun is blocked, why does the moon turn red? When light from the sun goes by the side of the Earth, it passes through a long and thick layer of Earth's atmosphere. Shorter wavelengths of sunlight, like blue, are scattered by the atmosphere, so by the time the light has finished its trip to the moon, more of the longer wavelengths, like red, are left over. On the Earth, the same thing happens at sunset as the ground you stand on gradually passes into night. As the eclipse ends, the moon leaves the umbra, returns to its normal color, and then leaves the penumbra, brightening and resuming its original cycle. Overall, the whole process lasts only from a few minutes to a few hours, so you'll have to be quick if you want to see it. But, as long as you're willing to stay awake, you'll catch the moon as you won't see it too often.
Well, thank you to the LRO team for putting that together. The reason that I wanted to play that video is that back in 2015, I took these 3 pictures of the moon during a lunar eclipse, and I was able to observe that the terminator, the edge of the Earth's shadow, changed its position on the moon as the moon passed through the penumbra and then through the umbra. And someone said that if you connected those dots and made a circle, you would actually be measuring the diameter of the shadow of the Earth, the umbra of the Earth. And so the outer circle here, by trying to make this outer circle, let's see here if I can draw a little bit. Yeah, by trying to make this outer circle pass through these shadow edges on the moon, I was actually able to draw a picture of just what part of the Earth's shadow the moon actually passed through, right over here, as it passed through the umbra here. And it was a total lunar eclipse, but only for a very short amount of time while the moon was here in the umbra. But I enjoyed that, and it was really fun to be able to make a picture, this static picture of what I thought the size of the Earth's shadow was out in space, something you can otherwise never see. Alrighty, let's see if we can keep going here. There we are. Here's another photograph of the Milky Way taken up in the Sedona area, but in addition to this picture, a second photograph was taken like this, with illuminating the foreground. So here's a case where you would take an exposure, and at some point during that exposure, run into the foreground and use some sort of light source to paint either the ground or the background, depending on how far away the background is, basically to give yourself the opportunity to do some artistic license with this photograph. So this is called painting with light during your nighttime photography. And here's a similar image where just at the end of the exposure, a wash of light was painted over the foreground. And experimenting with the amount of light that you use gives you the option to change these various things. One of the things that my friend Scott also does is he'll take two different photographs and then merge them together in Photoshop using various plugins, one of the foreground and one of the sky. That's common as well. And here's another case where at the end of a photograph, a flash was used to illuminate the foreground, giving this beautiful composite image. This is a photograph that I took of a telescope that I was using in South Africa for an attempt to record an occultation of a star in support of the New Horizons project for the MU69 flyby back in 2017. And so while we were waiting for the event, I took this photograph with a small camera on a tripod, and then I decided to try to use my red headlamp to basically light paint the white Skywatcher telescope, which of course turned red in the red light. So I got this separate effect. So this is another example of the kind of effect you can have using a little bit of light painting in the process of getting a short exposure image of the night sky. My friend Vicki Dirksen took this picture just last week. She went to the west side of Tucson and using her iPhone 11 Pro and a 9-second exposure took this photograph. Now with a 9-second exposure, even the sky in Tucson looks this bright. The 11 and 12 apparently have a night mode that allows them to give you exposures up to 30 seconds in dark skies. But when she turned around 180 degrees and looked west from Tucson, this was the image that she got. It's a little fuzzy here. It looks better on the phone at smaller resolution. But you can see the difference in the sky to the west of Tucson, completely dark with some beautiful saguaro. This is very close to the border of that extended part of the Saguaro National Monument. So let's talk about equipment a little bit. I can't really see any chat questions, but if there are questions for in the chat, I'd be happy to try to answer them along the way here. So if somebody can mention, if there's a question, just someone jump in and let me know what it is.
Oh, Tom, or Ted, I think we're asking people to put them in the Q&A so we can more easily spot them.
In the Q&A.
Yeah, they might get
okay,
lost
that's
in the
great.
chat.
All right, so as far as camera options go, these days, unless you're a big fan of film, digital is the way to go. A wide-angle lens is usually the best approach, and we'll talk about something called the rule of 500 later on. You'll want a camera with an adjustable exposure time, and an adjustable f-stop and aperture, and adjustable ISO or ASA, we used to call it in film days. And on your iPhone 11 and 12, as I mentioned, they have this night mode camera setting that Vicki was able to use successfully just a few weeks ago. I don't have one of these phones yet, but I know there are some apps that you can add to your iPhone or Android phone that will give you more flexibility with the camera settings than the default app that comes with the camera. I wanted to talk about these little battery-powered trackers also. A lot of people have made barn door trackers over the years. Now they're available from both Ioptron and from Vixen. Ioptron's called a Sky Tracker and Vixen's called the Polary. These are small battery-powered camera holders, which when you align them with Polaris, will give you the ability to take longer exposure photos with your SLR or small camera without having star trails. They follow the apparent movement of the star of the stars in the sky, no matter what angle you point them at, as long as the small, well, in the case, for example, in the case of the Polary, there's simply a little hole right here, and you look through that hole and point, and when you can see Polaris through that hole, the star tracker is properly aligned, and it will track the sky and give you the ability to have longer exposures without star trails. So they're pretty easy to set up and use. They run on a couple of Penlight batteries, and they'll hold cameras. Well, they'll certainly hold a small camera easily, and they apparently come with these options for counterweights, so you can actually put a heavier SLR on these things as well. As far as setting up your camera goes, a couple of recommendations. Better to shoot in RAW mode. RAW mode avoids any compression or modification of the image in the camera. You can also shoot in most cameras in a combination of RAW mode and one other image, so it'll take two images every time. So RAW plus L or RAW plus M, so that you can browse the thumbnail of the image without having to load the raw image, which can be quite large. But the benefit of the raw image is that there's no loss of information or detail through any compression algorithms that the camera might apply. You always want to shoot in manual mode. In dark, starry skies, a white balance of about 3200 to 3700 degrees Kelvin should give you good results. But in urban landscapes, of course, it's going to depend on the kind of light that you have, whether it's fluorescent light or LED lights or traditional lighting. Once you get your focus set, focus for infinity is not always where the infinity mark is on your camera. So you'll have to experiment a little bit with that. And once you get that locked down, once you get that focused, lock that position down with a piece of tape so that you don't move it by accident over the course of the night and find out that your camera is no longer in focus. You'll probably want to turn your LCD brightness down to the minimum to avoid losing your own night vision. And you probably want to avoid this option called long exposure noise reduction unless you really want to give it a try. And if you do, you'll probably want to about double your exposure time in order to get the same amount of light onto the chip. And don't forget to remove any daytime filters from your lenses. You won't need them at night. What are some of the challenges of night photography? Well,
Ed, can I interrupt you a second? I got a quick question for you.
sure.
For some of us who might want to use, say, an astrophotography type broadband filter, do you recommend those for nighttime exposures?
They will obviously eliminate a large amount of light. Typically, you would use those when you were starting with a telescope of significant aperture so that you'd gather enough light that throwing away half or three-quarters of it wouldn't be a big problem. But with a size lens that we're probably talking about, on a traditional SLR camera, you probably will find that you're going to extend your exposure to the point where it's going to be very difficult to avoid getting star trails. I'd certainly give it a try if you have a longer exposure, a longer focal length lens, and you'd like to try to get, an image of the Orion Nebula, say, using a gentle sky glow filter, something that would just cut out a few wavelengths of light. Certainly that could help darken the background and give you better images. Using a more aggressive filter, I would probably say if you tried it, you probably wouldn't like the results because of the fact that you would be struggling now trying to take a really long exposure in a situation where the sky was going to be moving relative to your chip.
Okay. And someone asked if you could repeat maybe later on the two books that you recommended at the early part of your presentation.
Thanks. Thanks for the reminder. I was going to duplicate that slide at the end, but what I'll do is go back and put that up and just leave it up at the end.
Oh, no, thank you.
Good. Will do. Okay. It can be challenging to do night photography, obviously. It requires a lot of patience, and of course, if it's cold out, it requires some really good, warm, long underwear and some winter clothes, because you're going to be standing around pretty much similar to a Messier marathon, doing nothing but waiting for images to come in. The exposures are longer, so you definitely want a good tripod, good solid tripod, and you have to know your camera well enough to operate it in the dark without using any lights, because you can only use a flashlight if you're alone. If you're with friends, you'll be shining your flashlight into their camera, and they might also be trying to do light painting in the foreground, and one of the things you don't want to do is add your flashlight light to their light painting for the person standing next to you. You'll probably have best results if you try to plan your shots in advance, and there are some new software tools that you can get familiar with. There's a program called the Photographer's Ephemeris, TPE. I've got some images of it here that will tell you where the sun or the moon will be at any time for any location on Earth, and it'll also tell you the exact times that the sun or moon will align with your subject, so you can use it to completely plan your line of sight, what will be in your line of sight as far as the astronomical objects go, when they will appear. Wonderful little program. It's not expensive. I think it runs on both Android and iPhone. It's called the TPE, the Photographer's Ephemeris. So let's move on to photographing stars as points. This is where we get to this thing we call the rule of 500. So the longer your focal length, a lens on your camera, the longer your focal length, the smaller area of the sky that you will be looking at, and the more quickly the stars will appear to move through your field of view. So the rule of 500 says that the longest shutter speed that you can use before your stars start to exhibit trails is equal to the number 500 divided by your lens's focal length in millimeters. So in our first case here, we've got a 500 millimeter focal length lens. Well, you might say, well, that's great. I'd like a nice large image scale of the Orion Nebula. I'm going to pretend I have a telescope attached to the front of my camera, get my 500 millimeter focal length telephoto lens out, and you will find out that you will be able to expose that camera for about 1 second before the stars start to exhibit trails based on this rule of 500. With a 100 millimeter focal length lens, you can probably get about 5 seconds or so before the stars start to exhibit trails. And with an 18 millimeter lens, as you see down in the bottom, that would give you close to half a minute before the images of the stars start to appear elongated in your image. Oh, excuse me. Now, of course, you can, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but raising the ISO value up to 3200 or 6400, something that will give you more sensitivity without necessarily adding a huge amount of noise to the image, will allow you to get more photons into the image in the amount of time that you're allowed here before the stars start to trail. So the rule of 500, divide 500 by your lens focal length in millimeters, and this is for full frame cameras. There are some adjustment factors for APS-C or crop sensor cameras. For Canon, for example, you would want to multiply the lens focal length by this crop factor of 1.6 to give you the actual effective focal length. So it's a little worse with the smaller chips. With 1.6 to 1.5 for most of the cameras. For Olympus cameras, it's 2.0. This may change over time, of course, as APS-C cameras may change a bit. So Canon T3i 100 millimeter lens would have an effective focal length of 160 millimeters, so you'd divide 500 by 160 if you had a crop sensor 100 millimeter lens. You'd only have to divide it by 100 if you had a full frame camera.
Another question was asked about allowing your camera to come to ambient temperature. Is that a big issue for DSLRs?
No. The biggest issue for DSLRs is keeping the chip from getting too hot over the course of taking these long exposures. That's true whether your camera is mounted on one of these little Vixen Polary things or attached to the back of your C14 on your scope, on your mount in your observatory. Yeah, uncooled SLR cameras do tend to get noisier as they get warmer, and they get warmer over the course of the night. So it's not a question of the lens getting down to ambient temperature. It's more a question of how do you keep the chip as cool as possible. I'm not sure if there's a way to do that for an SLR camera. I don't think there are coolers that you can attach to those. So it's just something that you have to do. I think my friend Scott lets his camera cool for a full minute. He lets the camera sensor chip cool down for a full minute in between every exposure, no matter how long or short they are. It extends of course it extends the amount of time that it takes him to get the same images, but he finds that it eliminates a lot of the noise.
So shooting in the summertime is going to be worse. Shooting in the chill of the winter will be better.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sure. So finally, we'll talk about ISO and exposure length. So this is the exposure triangle. Shutter speed, these are the three basic knobs that you have on most SLR cameras. Shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. And here, of course, are the photographer's main tools. To gather more light, you would raise the ISO, lower the f-stop, opening the shutter more widely. Of course, or you can buy a lens with more glass, of course. Or you can increase your exposure time to all of those to gather more light. And I'm not sure that we ever want to gather less light, but those are the directions that you would go with those three main tools, the knobs that every camera and every photographer has at their fingertips. Higher ISO will get you more sensitivity, but it will of course add some noise to the image. Opening the shutter all the way will decrease your depth of field, but typically if you're attempting to take a picture of infinitely far away stars, that's not an issue. But of course, if you want to take a picture with the foreground in focus as well, you may find that setting your camera to infinity makes it impossible to get the foreground to be at the level of focus that you would like. So in that case, you might want to try to take two images, one of the sky, one of the foreground, a long exposure of the sky, a short exposure of the foreground with light painting, and then take those two images and combine them in Photoshop or in some other tools. I also want to talk a little bit about this advanced topic of stacking. I mentioned that we stack these images a little bit. This is a question of, do you take a single long exposure versus multiple shorter exposures? This is a standard technique in regular astrophotography as well, because stacking the multiple short exposures can significantly improve the signal to noise ratio of your image. The secret to stacking is very simple. In each exposure, the stars and the foreground will stay in one place, but the noise jumps around. So at the end, when you have multiple shorter exposures, and you average these images by essentially stacking the images up one on top of the other and letting the software average down through the stack each pixel, the noise will only be in a pixel on some of those images, but with any luck, the image, the stars that you want to take pictures of, will be in every pixel. And so the mathematical averaging eliminates a lot of the noise, but leaves behind the images that you really want, the star images. So this is the secret to stacking and taking multiple exposures. It also eliminates the disaster when right at the end of your long exposure, an airplane flies through the image and ruins your opportunity to throw away one exposure out of many that got ruined by an airplane going through it. Or your neighbor shines their flashlight into your camera. This is one photographer's stacking kit, my friend Scott. He uses a program called Deep Sky Stacker for sky images. uses Photoshop to stack foreground images. And he has a couple of plugins called Easy Panel and Raya Pro that he uses to merge these stacks with each other. I have used Registax and AutoStacker as well. They are all fairly easy to use. They have different features, different capabilities. There are wonderful forums on cloudy nights that will give you suggestions on which of these will fit your needs the best and how to get the most out of them as well. Here's an example of the results that you might have. This is a single image of the moon. And here is the result of 60 short images stacked and then averaged down to a single image as well. You can see the incredible difference that you get. And I have seen many people take extremely good images, come up with extremely good images of planets by taking video, which of course is simply a series of individual exposures, and then stacking the video frames. In fact, my friend Ed Ting, who lives in New Hampshire and owns the scopereviews.com website, when Ed is doing outreach for the public, he does it by pointing his video camera at a planet and taking video all night long. The folks who are oohing and eyeing over the images of Jupiter or Saturn or Mars don't even know that what Ed is actually doing is gathering data that he'll go back to the lab and stack to come up with some beautiful, beautiful static images of the object that everybody's looking at all night. So in summary, learn your camera, practice changing your settings in a dark room. You won't, it will be much more convenient for you if you know just what button to go to in the dark, and make a checklist of equipment, obviously, just like you would for a Messier marathon. Practice your focusing techniques outside at night. As I say, it's probably not the case that your camera will be focused at infinity just because the little infinity line is lined up with the other line. Plan your first shoot, scout a location, check the moon phase, sunrise and sunset, moonrise and moonset times. Do you want stars as points? Do you want star trails? Do you want to do light painting, or do you want to try them all? There's no limit to what you can do in this part of the hobby. Take a friend with you on the first shoot. It'll be nice. Bring along some hot coffee or cocoa, and be patient and have some fun in the dark. So thanks for that. I'll go back to the first image here and put up those two books for you, because I agree that we should give you a chance to check out the titles of those. So I'll go back here and share the screen. Okay, I have to share this screen again. Start this here. There we are. Okay.
Okie doke. Thank you, Ted. I've noticed that anytime I try to shoot a picture with my DSLR of Mars, it's just too bright. So I make it shorter and shorter and shorter and lower my ISO, and it's still too dang bright. Is stacking the only option?
Well, if stacking a bunch of overexposed images is not going to help get you out of that problem. All you can do is decrease your exposure, up to 1,000th or a 2,000th or a 4,000th of a second, and hope that you can avoid Mars being too bright on the image. Also, lowering the ISO down to 100 will probably help as well, as will lowering the f-stop, closing the shutter a bit. So a combination of all those things should get you down to the point where Mars is not overexposed in every image, and then stacking will allow you to bring out more of the detail once you've got some good images.
Yeah, I've seen Tom Palakis's images of Mars, and they're just super duper. Real impressed with that.
Yep. Yep.
Okie doke. Tom Mazdan's going to leave us now. So any other questions out there? I guess not. Okay, from Howard Wack to all panelists, thanks. And to my board, thanks. We'll talk offline about some other stuff. And we do appreciate the presentation. I'm seeing a lot of thanks and awesome type of comments on the presentation. I really enjoyed it because I do enjoy the night sky, not astrophotography as much as just being able to pull in things with using a little bit more light from the camera. Although I've invested in some pricey equipment, I just haven't learned to use it yet. I like the simplicity of DSLRs and just learn that first.
Yep.
I'm an old photographer. I can learn it if I have to. So I guess we are at the end. So I will gavel us out. And let's see. See, they all been so fun and informative. Let's see if we can get my guys back up on here. My one last. Okay, Paul, you came back up, and I'm gonna see if I can get Rick back up. Okay, add to start video. Jack. Add to start video. Okay, there we go. Get my guys. Oh, I lost. All right, there they go. Any more comments
Back on.
we need to bring up before we gavel out of here? Paul, Jack, Rick?
Yo,
Hey.
Did
hey,
you,
Jack.
did you get any volunteers for treasurer, Rick? In the
No,
story of my life.
but I'd like to ask Jack if he would like, if he saw that thing about the North Rim, if he would like to take Steve Dotter's invitation to take over as coordinator.
Oh, well, thank you. I won't be able to do that, though.
That is something I failed to mention at the meeting, that Steve Dotter, yes, has been instrumental in making our North Rim star parties for the national park up there, which is really fantastic stuff. It's just incredibly interesting and fun. The people up there just appreciate the heck out of it. And besides, the North Rim is my favorite spot in the United States, next to my own bed, maybe. But yes, I'm that lazy. But yeah, I've been to the North Rim numerous times, and I just love having my early morning coffee at 6 a.m., sitting on the veranda, staring off into the canyon. And it's a nice place up there to view from. I've not taken my telescope to the North Rim because I've normally been hiking across to the North Rim, not to honk my horn. But yeah, I like to go up north, south of Tucson, back in the woods there sometimes, set up my telescope, do some camping and stargazing up there. So anybody that is interested, Steve says he will mentor you. So and this could be quite the entertaining device. I myself might attempt to do this, but I've got some family issues that have to take precedence at the moment, but we'll deal with that. Let's see the last Q&A. What is it? Claude wants to know, what is it with the COVID beard and hair? Like I say, the Zoom background makes it look like I've really gotten a haircut, but no, my hair is the longest it's been since college. And Santa Claus here, he's going to be doing double duty, the COVID clause, we call it.
I've become a hairdresser. Now I do my own.
I barely shave. So, and we know that Rick doesn't at all. So
That's the easy part.
that is. So if nobody has another question or what have you, I'm going to gavel us out of here and end this thing. And we will talk offline later on about setting the course for next year, picking the dates for our meetings. and other group business. So here we go. Meeting's adjourned. It is. Oh, it is? I'm sorry. You say that. Say what? Meeting's adjourned. Oh, it is?
Second.
Okay. Appreciate that, Jack. Here we're going. 3, 2, 1.